Hi, this is Ted, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on Memorial Day 2026. And we'll start with this kind of interesting article. Blind Waymo users revel in the joy of riding alone. Waymo has been an object of frustration to some in California. For visually impaired people, it can also bring a rare feeling of independence. And this is by Sonia Rao. Reuben Brunt hopped off a ferry, tapped his white cane against the sidewalk, and held his phone to his ear to listen for directions. His destination was a white Jaguar idling a few blocks away, with no one behind the wheel. Mr. Brunt, 28, was born with a rare eye disorder. He can't drive himself and had never experienced the feeling of being alone in a car until Waymo's self-driving vehicles started navigating San Francisco's hilly streets 2 years ago. Now Mr. Brunt will occasionally make the hour-long journey across the bay from his home in Solano County, California, just to ride in one. It's that feeling of independence and actually having the control, he said. Being able to play whatever music you want, feeling like you're in your own car. With hubs in San Francisco and Los Angeles, Waymo and its autonomous vehicle fleet have sometimes been a target of frustration and conflict, trapping riders when attacked, stalling during power outages, and even killing a beloved neighborhood cat. But with the largest population of blind people in the country, California has also seen the robot taxis offer something unexpected and joyous to the visually impaired, an opportunity for solitude in the streets. I don't have to talk to another human being, said Sarah Funes, a South San Francisco resident who is partially blind and partially paralyzed from a brain tumor. I get in a car and I'm just alone. Another benefit is that driverless cars don't discriminate, Mr. Funes said. Ms. Funes. She often posts online about human rideshare drivers who refuse to transport her service dog despite policies requiring them to accommodate service animals. Claire Stanley, who is legally blind and uses a guide dog, said she had also had to battle for Uber and Lyft drivers to pick her up at home in Washington, D.C. When she travels to a city with autonomous ride shares, she and her dog, a yellow Labrador named Tulane, jump into them without a struggle. When you don't have a driver, there's no driver to say no, she said. Safety concerns have circulated after cases in which Waymo vehicles drove through a police standoff in Los Angeles and blocked ambulances responding to a shooting at a college bar in Austin, Texas. But many women, especially those with visual impairments, consider them safer than cars driven by men. Uber, in particular, has faced mounting scrutiny from lawmakers for what has been described as a pervasive pattern of sexual violence during rides. I'm very cognizant about not being able to see the person and know what they're doing, said Ms. Stanley. Waymo has worked to bolster its popularity among riders with disabilities by partnering with several organizations to solicit feedback, including the American Council for the Blind, where Ms. Stanley works. The company has also financially contributed to some of those organizations and has shared the experiences of blind riders in public relations campaigns designed to counter negative perceptions of its cars. Ms. Funes said she would love to take Waymos more often, but their higher costs could be prohibitive. I would exclusively use them if they didn't cost almost 3 times as much, she said. Waymo currently operates a fleet of about 1,000 cars across the Bay Area, compared to tens of thousands of Uber and Lyft drivers. The lower supply for self-driving cars contributes to higher prices, with Waymos costing on average around 30% more than other ride shares. Waymo is quickly growing with plans to expand to over a dozen cities in the next few years. Other self-driving car companies, including Zoox, I don't know, and Cruise, have entered the market as well. Mr. Brunt dreams of owning a driverless car one day so that he can always travel on his own terms, he said. For now, though, he settles for getting to the city as often as possible to ride Waymos. On a drizzly day last month, he was heading to the De Young Museum in Golden Gate Park. He had some trouble finding his Waymo's precise location, so he pressed a button on the app to play a melody from the car, and he followed the noise. He hopped into the passenger seat, and his Spotify account immediately connected to the car's stereo system, blasting his electronic music. As the steering wheel began to turn, moving the car onto the road, Mr. Brunt, ready to enjoy the ride, leaned his seat back and fiddled with the temperature until it was set to 70 degrees. "That feeling of independence is amazing," he said. "It's something I never thought I would have as I was growing up." And you may have heard that Pope Leo XIV issued an encyclical about AI over the weekend. And here's an article called, "As AI Fever Rises in Silicon Valley, Pope Leo Has a Few Words." This is by David Streitfeld. Silicon Valley has always had messianic dreams dating back to the days when computers filled entire rooms. One of the oldest industry jokes has a programmer asking a computer, "Is there a God?" The computer answers, "There is now." The Whole Earth Catalog, a proto-hacker compendium of tools that deeply influenced Steve Jobs, proclaimed, "We are as gods and might as well get good at it." But investing hundreds of billions of dollars in artificial intelligence, tech leaders are signaling that those early dreams have been fulfilled. Next stop, transcendence. Just as the new religion of AI seemed to be solidifying its control over mankind's destiny, however, a new voice is being heard on the other side of the world. Its message to the tech industry: slow down, elevate the human. Machines are not gods. Pope Leo XIV, the first American pope, published with great ceremony on Monday his first encyclical, Magnificat Humanitas, or Magnificent Humanity. The 42,300-word policy statement is respectful and named no names, but is at heart a sharp rebuke to Silicon Valley's assertions that it alone can be trusted to develop the future. The Pope acknowledged that AI can be a valuable tool, but the technology tends to amplify the power of those who already possess economic resources, expertise, and access to data. Without adequate oversight and transparency, he warned, those who control AI will impose their own moral vision, which will become the invisible infrastructure of these systems. That would be bad news, he said. A more moral AI is not enough if that morality is determined by a few. The encyclical is expected to be at the center of the 70-year-old pontiff's reign in the same way that Rerum Novarum, which advocated for workers' rights and a fair wage, was at the heart of Pope Leo XIII's papacy at the end of the 19th century. Released while Silicon Valley slept, Magnifica Humanitas marked the latest effort to shape and possibly restrain the AI boom. Trump last week came close to signing a measure that would have given the federal government the power to evaluate AI models before they were publicly released, then canceled the signing. That same day, California's Governor Gavin Newsom signed a measure to study AI's impact on employment, an acknowledgement of the turmoil the companies insist is coming. Elon Musk, who has his own AI ambitions, tried to derail OpenAI, the leading AI company, with a lawsuit, but was thwarted this month on technical grounds. Magnifica Humanitas arrives as a challenge to tech moguls like Musk, whose power and influence rival such medieval popes as Innocent III. Pope Innocent asserted that the papacy was the sun and mere kings the moon. The latter could not be seen without the light cast by the former. Love him or hate him, Mr. Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, Sam Altman, and their peers exert similar influence on our modern kings, which is to say politicians. The American economy is being propped up by spending on AI. The technology is being deployed in offices and classrooms with dizzying speed and unknown effect. The old religion challenging the new is a dramatic story, the stuff of thrillers. Silicon Valley has encountered little public opposition in its 50-year history. Certainly nothing with the sweep and authority of Magnificat Humanitas. Pope Leo is the spiritual leader of 1.4 billion Catholics, and instructing them to be cautious or even suspicious of AI, especially if the warning is regularly reinforced among the laity, could put a dent in tech's global ambitions. How much influence does the Pope have in our secular world? Asked Timothy Ahn, a doctoral candidate at the University of California, Berkeley, studying the development of AI in religious institutions. We're about to see. I doubt that tech executives in Palo Alto are going to be reading this encyclical. He said that in the best case scenario, the encyclical will shape some moral deliberations. Popes have traditionally worked with the long term in mind, and any evaluation of the encyclical's effect is years away. Those who know both Silicon Valley and the Vatican say any expectations of a head on confrontation, much less a holy war, are misguided. A decade ago, Pope Francis began inviting tech luminaries in for an annual AI conference called the Minerva Dialogues. In any case, if Leo confronted Silicon Valley outright, he would probably lose. The fact that the Vatican unveiled the encyclical with Christopher Olah, a co-founder of Anthropic, the self-styled good AI firm, pointed to the possibility that Leo is trying less to undermine AI than simply participate in the conversation around it. When Francis released his scathing encyclical about climate change in 2015, no oil company executives were invited to speak. Luke Burgess, the founder of the Clooney Institute, which explores how faith and reason bear on technology and innovation, was optimistic that Leo's words would have an effect. He said, "This encyclical is a live wire that truly has the potential to change what is getting built in Silicon Valley. It could help to give people a vocabulary to understand a new thing in the same way that Rerum Novarum helped people understand the concept of a just wage. But it won't happen automatically or quickly or easily." He said the church is only beginning its work here. It needs to engage with a powerful counterforce that currently has it outnumbered in both capital and compute. 20 years ago, even the idea of a confrontation between Pope and Silicon Valley was unthinkable. But in recent years, tech has moved deeper into matters that used to be exclusively religious in nature. There are widespread efforts to ward off death through various forms of lifestyle hacking. The singularity, the rapturous moment when man and machine merge, is another hot topic. Mr. Thiel, the tech investor, gives lectures about the Antichrist, which he says has arrived in the form of environmentalists. A former Google engineer, Anthony Levandowski, set up a church in 2017 to promote the realization of a Godhead based on artificial intelligence. He closed it and then opened it again in 2023. Mr. Lewandowski, who was sentenced to 18 months in prison for stealing trade secrets from Google but was pardoned by Trump, was ahead of his time. AI is now widely seen in tech and tech sympathetic circles as quasi-divine. People are so ready to make AGI their god, said Gary Tan, who runs the startup incubator Y Combinator, referring to artificial general intelligence, the next level of AI. John Lennox, the retired Oxford mathematician who wrote 2084, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity, said this race for AI superintelligence is to make God and be God. Bill Gates, contemplating the glorious future, said, "You can almost call it a new religion." If AI is a new religion or God, that puts it in competition with the old religions and the old gods. And Silicon Valley generally has one response to competition: squash it. Whatever ethical and humanist reasons Pope Leo has to protest AI, he also needs to defend his market share, much the way Walmart had to defend itself against the upstart Amazon. The tech world's initial reaction to the encyclical was muted on the holiday weekend. Jack Dorsey, a co-founder of Twitter, recirculated it to his millions of followers on X. For all the noise over religion in Silicon Valley, Leo doesn't have many faithful there. A character on the satirical show Silicon Valley once joked that Christianity was borderline illegal in the tech community, although the reality is more complicated. Quick break, you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Nearly a quarter of San Franciscans are Catholic, a higher percentage than in the United States as a whole, according to a recent Pew poll. But the percentage of the religiously unaffiliated in the city is also much higher. The bottom line is that relatively few tech workers are likely to hear about the Pope's new encyclical from a priest. Many AI applications encroach on the traditional human role of the spiritual counselor. The popular app Text with Jesus now offers voicemail responses. Bible.ai describes itself as here to simply be a helper, a listener, a friend. Just Like Me offers a Jesus chat box that it lauds for its compassionate guidance and unconditional support. Said Greg Epstein, the humanist chaplain at Harvard and MIT, people are turning to AI in their darkest moments. They're turning to it like an object of worship. But Pope Leo is saying that the true source of virtue is in humanity and in God. Mr. Epstein, the author of Tech Agnostic, How Technology Became the World's Most Powerful Religion and Why It Desperately Needs a Reformation, said the Pope is really doing the Lord's work here. And I say that as an atheist. There are so few institutions left on planet Earth that have the gravitas, the strength, the communal network to take on this phenomenon, which is trying to become inevitable and superhuman. Nonetheless, he fears it may be too late. Big tech is essentially its own religion with its own theology and rights, not to mention its own power and influence, said Mr. Epstein. Pope Leo's encyclical will automatically be viewed as false doctrine. And some of you may have heard this, but I think it's hysterical. this, this happened a while ago. Even the vicar of Christ can be thwarted by a customer service representative. About 2 months after Robert Francis Prevost, a Chicago-born cardinal, became Pope Leo XIV in Vatican City, he put in a call to his bank back home. A close friend, the Reverend Tom McCarthy, told a gathering of Catholics in Naperville, Illinois. The new pope identified himself as Robert Prevost, saying that he wished to change the phone number and address that the bank had on file. The pope dutifully answered the security questions correctly. Then the woman on the line for the bank told him that it wasn't enough. He would have to come into the branch in person. He said, "Well, I'm not going to be able to do that. I gave you all the security questions." The bank employee apologized. The Pope tried a different tack. "Would it matter to you if I told you I'm Pope Leo?" he asked. She hung up. I think that's great. By the way, somebody in the Vatican knew the bank president and got it all straightened out. Here's another interesting article. Were the Constitution's authors a little too optimistic? This is by Adam Liptak. The men who drafted the Constitution knew they were playing with fire when they created a novel and powerful new office, the President of the United States. Benjamin Franklin said at the Constitutional Convention, "The first man put at the helm will be a good one," referring to George Washington. "Nobody knows what sort may come afterward. The executive will be always increasing here, as elsewhere, till it ends in a monarchy." The framers were not blind to the danger that they were creating a new kind of king. And the Constitution they adopted a few months later tried to strike a balance in inventing what was then a wholly novel office. They wanted a president who was decisive, responsive, and responsible, but they also sought to establish a constitutional structure able to constrain a president who aspired to be a monarch. They differed about how to achieve that balance. Alexander Hamilton, who argued in favor of an exceptionally strong president at the convention, he proposed, for instance, that they should serve for life, wrote in the Federalist Papers that there was more to fear from populists than from those committed to a firm and efficient government. He wrote, "Of those men who have overturned the liberties of republics, the greatest number have begun their career by paying an obsequious court to the people, commencing demagogues and ending tyrants. The Constitution's framers were doubtless brilliant, and the document they drafted has endured. It's the oldest written national constitution still in force anywhere in the world. But as our nation commemorates its 250th anniversary, some constitutional scholars say that the second Trump presidency is calling into question whether the nation's founding charter and sacred text truly provides the balance that the founders wanted. Trump has used the power of the federal government to bully universities, law firms, and news outlets, undermine the independence of the Justice Department by instructing it to prosecute his personal enemies, defied Congress by impounding money it had instructed him to spend, flouted countless court orders, and cut off funding to states led by Democrats. The list is hardly exhaustive, and it's certainly possible to quarrel with given items in the Bill of Particulars. And it's not as though other presidents have always been punctilious in following the Constitution's commands. Still, the second Trump presidency is different in kind, legal scholars said, one that approaches the maximalist view of presidential power that Franklin and other founders feared. Sai Krishna Prakash, a law professor at the University of Virginia and the author of The Living Presidency, an originalist argument against its ever-expanding powers, said the modern presidency would be unrecognizable to its framers. I think they'd be astonished, not merely by Trump, but by the breadth of the executive power in the modern era, he said. The office the framers created, the American president, was unlike any other chief executive in any other nation at the time. And while other aspects of the Constitution have been quite influential, few modern democracies followed its vision of executive power. The exceptions were mostly in Latin America, where strong presidencies created in the 19th century often degenerated into dictatorships. Parliamentary models in which the executive, there the prime minister, emerges from and is accountable to the legislature are more common. In a parliamentary system, the executive and the legislature are in dialogue rather than structural opposition. Prime ministers generally do not serve fixed terms and may be removed by a vote of no confidence. The framers rejected that model for something new. They were looking for a sweet spot. They wanted a president less powerful than a king, whom they had rebelled against, but more effective than the state governors of the time, who were all but powerless, or prime ministers who were creatures of the legislature. The framers were trying to solve a puzzle. Michael McConnell, a law professor at Stanford who wrote in The President Who Would Not Be King, Executive Power Under the Constitution, how could the delegates achieve the independence, vigor, secrecy, and dispatch necessary for an effective executive without rendering him an elected monarch? Defining the scope of the new office had an improvised quality. James Madison, writing to Washington just before he left for the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in April 1787, said he had not given the matter much thought. A national executive must also be provided, Madison wrote. I have scarcely ventured as yet to form my own opinion either of the manner in which it ought to be constructed or of the authorities with which it ought to be clothed. Indeed, Professor McConnell wrote that Madison, revered as the father of the Constitution, was a quintessentially legislative personality and had few ideas about how to construct an executive branch. Hamilton was another matter. At the convention, he argued for a president who would serve for life and have absolute veto power over legislation. The Constitution did not go quite that far. It called for 4-year terms to build in a measure of political accountability and allowed presidential vetoes to be overridden by 2/3 majorities in Congress. But his basic attitude stood. The next year, defending the proposed Constitution during the ratification debates, Hamilton set out his vision of presidential power. Energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government, he wrote. In those same papers, Madison acknowledged that the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. But he added that the Constitution had solved this problem through the separation of powers and by providing for checks and balances. The framers believed that the threat of impeachment and removal would be a decisive check on the president. They envisioned a Congress that would be jealous of its institutional power and would muster, when appropriate, not only a simple majority vote in the House of Representatives to accuse presidents of misconduct, but also a two-thirds vote in the Senate to convict and remove them. To the extent that they're worried about a demagogue, they think impeachment will be the mechanism, said Professor Prakash. They expected that impeachment would deal with scoundrels, but they failed to anticipate a development that would make impeachment improbable: the rise of political parties. The classic account of this constitutional blind spot is Separation of Parties, Not Powers, a 2006 article in the Harvard Law Review by Darrell Levinson and Richard Pildes. To this day, the idea of self-sustaining political competition built into the structure of government is frequently portrayed as the unique genius of the U.S. Constitution, the very basis for the success of American democracy, they wrote. Yet the truth is closer to the opposite. As competition between the legislative and executive branches was displaced by competition between two major parties, the machine that was supposed to go of itself stopped running. Many presidents have tested the Constitution's limits. Thomas Jefferson pulled off the Louisiana Purchase even though he believed it was unconstitutional. Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. Richard Nixon created a culture of executive lawlessness that culminated in the Watergate scandal and his resignation. This suggests the founding generation may have been unduly optimistic about the power of norms and expectations, grounded in part in Washington's sterling character. Professor McConnell said, "I do think that they expected that the president would be bound by a sense of duty to the law and to the Constitution." The rise of political parties, to say nothing of the current extreme polarization between them, has made other forms of congressional supervision of the president vanishingly rare. There have been 4 presidential impeachments in the history of the United States: of Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, and twice Donald Trump. In none of the 4 cases did the Senate muster the required two-thirds vote to convict. Today, Professor Prakash said, Congress would be entitled to tell the executive branch that immigration and customs enforcement agents must display badges and not wear masks. Lawmakers could, he added, forbid the president from using the National Guard to enforce the law. They have a lot of authority, he said. It's just that. In the modern era, it's very hard for them to flex it because half the Congress is in the president's pocket, and the president has a veto. Michael Klarman, a law professor at Harvard and the author of The Framers' Coup, The Making of the United States Constitution, said the framers could not have predicted all that would come in the centuries after they drafted the nation's founding charter. I don't think they could imagine where we've ended up. The framers were wary of popular democracy. Senators were initially chosen by state legislatures to insulate them from passing political passions. Similarly, the framers envisioned an electoral college made up of discerning citizens who would exercise independent judgment in deciding who was fit to be president. Hamilton described the original expectation in the Federalist Papers. He said, "Men chosen by the people for the special purpose of selecting the president will be most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to such complicated investigations." Professor Klarman said they tried to create a system that was resistant to populist influence. When they talked about what populist interests could produce, they actually described a kind of demagogic authoritarian like Trump. These days, these circuit breakers are gone. Voters elect senators, and the Electoral College is a formality. A structure designed by elites wary of direct democracy has moved toward one far more responsive to the popular will. That has made the government more vulnerable to the sort of populism that the framers feared. But it may also, whether expressed in public opinion on the streets and at the ballot box, supply a counterweight to the executive overreach that some of the men who drafted and ratified the Constitution feared. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Now, I have to tell you that as I was looking through the Times today, there were a lot fewer articles in the news, I guess because of the holiday, and a lot more opinion pieces. So that's why I'm choosing the things I am. This is an essay by Frank Bruni, who is usually pretty good, called "The Brain is the New Belly." Words are tricky critters. They constantly skitter away. When I'm banging on a keyboard or babbling into a microphone, I'll sometimes stop short and realize that the phrase on the tip of my fingers or my tongue has vanished and isn't coming back, no matter how furiously I will it to. I used to chalk this up to my brain's deficiencies. Now I half panic that it's brain disease. Uh-oh, I say to friends. Early onset. That's a new shorthand that we bandy back and forth because we're getting older. I'm 61. Because consciousness of age related dementia has reached some frightful peak, and because we're battling minor anxiety with major hyperbole, premature fears with dark humor. We're not outliers. All around me, I hear and see mentions of cognitive health, which, like early onset, is a term that wasn't nearly as prevalent a decade ago. I trip across more and more articles about brain optimization. I encounter more and more ads for elixirs that promise to perpetuate my acuity and protect my precious thoughts. I've never been so conscious of my consciousness. I've never been so mindful of my mind. In the Washington Post, a little over 2 weeks ago, Ariana Eunjung Cha wrote that Americans on the whole spend billions of dollars each year chasing the idea of a sharper mind, and that 1 in 5 adults over age 50 use vitamins or supplements specifically to try to boost brain functions like memory, attention, or focus. Daily Brain Boost, Brain Drive, Brain Guard Plus, Focus Factor, and Brain MD are the catchy names of just some of the products and product lines marketed at people who are more eager for reassurances than alert to the dearth of compelling proof that such pills and potions work. Last month, my Times colleague, Dana G. Smith, examined 6 common medications that may lower the risk of dementia, and in a separate report just 5 days later, 4 drugs that may increase it. According to the Times' most emailed list, both articles were widely shared, suggesting readers' deep investment in them. Along with popular brain journalism, there are plentiful brain books written by members of a growing pantheon of brain whisperers who promise that the right diet, exercise, and engagement can safeguard our smarts. In Keep Sharp, Dr. Sanjay Gupta assembles tools for a task detailed in the subtitle, Build a Better Brain at Any Age. The Ageless Brain presents a best brain protocol by Dr. Dale Breedson, and it inspired a recipe collection, the Ageless Brain Cookbook for Seniors by Hadwin Macy. Dr. David Perlmutter has stretched his prescriptions for brain health into more than a half dozen volumes, including Grain Brain, about the danger of too many carbohydrates, Brain Maker, about the benefits of gut microbes, Brain Defenders, about the importance of the immune system, and Brain Wash, about detoxing the brain. To feed your thoughts, heed his thoughts. Or just play with puzzles, as a rapidly expanding number of my friends, relatives, and other acquaintances do. A widespread belief that brain games are game changers has launched multiple brain training websites and apps, and most likely contributed to the sale of countless Sudoku, crossword, and logic puzzle books over the past 2 decades. Smith and Katie Mogg wrote in the Times in late 2024. I'd like to think my habit of starting every day with a sequence of challenges in the Times, Wordle, Connections, Strands, the Mini, the Meaty, and Spelling Bee, amounts to mental calisthenics, and that when I bop over to the New Yorker to play Shuffalo, I'm doing yet more cognitive cardio. It's not loafing, it's working out. It's not procrastination, it's brain maxing. An irrational rationalization? Not given the statistics and the stakes. We live longer than we once did. which puts more of us in the path of Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. According to a report published in the journal Alzheimer's and Dementia last month, about 7.4 million Americans live with Alzheimer's, which isn't the only kind of dementia, and more than 12 million relatives and other unpaid people help care for them. I'm hard-pressed to think of anybody my age, or for that matter decades younger, who hasn't watched a loved one grow increasingly confused, distraught, and in sore need of steady guidance, who hasn't witnessed the erosion of memories and erasure of independence, who hasn't noticed how incremental and initially subtle those processes can be, and who hasn't wondered about their own risk factors. When people I know announce that they've cut down on alcohol consumption, they almost always mention a desire to do right by their brains. In a 2024 survey of roughly 1,700 Americans aged 45 or older, almost 83% said that they worried at least somewhat about developing Alzheimer's. But while the prospect of dementia is surely the main driver of Americans intensifying attention to the workings and whirring of their brains, I detect an additional dynamic. Cognitive health is the next frontier in self-care. It's the direction in which people who've made progress on other parts of their anatomy turn. It's the unchecked box on many affluent Americans' to-do lists. Thanks to cosmetic dermatology, wrinkled and saggy skin are on the run. Saggy skin is on the run. Courtesy of Ozempic and its kin, love handles are in retreat. Maybe the brain is the new belly, in need of tending, in line for toning, in want of perfection. Or not. I'm struck by several paradoxes. For all our fussing over cognition, we seem to get stupider and stupider. We fret about our brain's juice as we outsource their jobs to artificial intelligence. I try not to linger too long with any bot. I do the puzzles, but not the pills. I drink less than I used to, but perhaps more than I should. Is that proper brain fitness? Is my brain in good shape? It's certainly busy with those questions, and I can't tell if they're prompted by changes in the culture around me or in the circuitry inside me. There's probably some word for that kind of doubt. Damned if I can find it. Here's another editorial. This is called Iran is Trolling Us, and We're Not Doing Anything About It. This is by Jessica Brandt. Perhaps you've seen the viral video, a satire rendered in Lego. President Trump launches missiles at Iranian power grids, then sweats through a nightmare and ends up rocking alone on the floor crying. White surrender flag behind him, ceasefire papers at his feet. Through his tears, he eats a taco, a nod to the acronym for the phrase Trump always chickens out. Since the Iran war began, Iranian officials and pro-Iran influencers have used AI-generated content like this, clever, highly shareable, fluent in pop culture references like Lego, Marvel, Forrest Gump, to ridicule the United States or present Iran sympathetically. The strategy has been effective in its reach. In the first 50 days of the conflict, official Iranian accounts on X earned roughly 900 million views and 22 million likes, more than 30 times their previous 50-day totals for likes, according to a recent analysis. During the same period, shares of content on those accounts rose from 4.3 million to 76 million. Many other Lego-style videos have gone viral too, garnering tens of thousands of likes and millions of views on Instagram, TikTok, and X. In recent years, policymakers concerned about artificial intelligence and influence operations have tended to focus on deep fakes, voice clones, and fabricated videos that are designed to deceive. That threat remains urgent. In the first weeks of the Iran war, social networks were flooded with AI-generated videos and images depicting decimated buildings that were never attacked and demoralized soldiers who did not exist. But with the Lego-style videos and other satirical content, Iran and its supporters are using a different tool for influencing public opinion. It's not disinformation. It's not traditional war propaganda. It's trolling. No one is being deceived because deception isn't the point. Reach, ridicule, and cultural resonance are. The concern is bigger than Iran. China, a more capable, wealthier adversary that has been surprisingly bad at the online propaganda game, is watching and learning. Internal documents from the Chinese AI company Golexy, detailed in the Times last year, suggest that Beijing may already be considering experimenting with tools to track public debates within the U.S., monitoring broad sentiment as well as the views and arguments of individual Americans. Pair that sort of capacity with the ability to use AI to generate large amounts of culturally fluent material, and you've got a recipe for increasingly sophisticated and targeted influence campaigns. Anytime foreign adversaries have a tool for advancing their interests at our expense, the United States should have a robust strategy for countering its effects. In this case, we don't, and we should be developing one. The strategies we use to combat covert foreign influence, such as exposure and sanctions, are irrelevant to efforts that aren't hidden or illicit. The tactics we use to combat deep fakes, such as watermarking and labeling, aren't relevant to videos that aren't pretending to be authentic. And traditional tools of public diplomacy, educational campaigns, formal statements of outrage, aren't nimble enough to counter propaganda that resembles entertainment and disseminates with meme like scope and speed. We need action on two fronts. First, we need regular threat intelligence reporting from the big American AI companies. Many major social media companies in the U.S. regularly issue public reports of possible threats, domestic and foreign, that they detect on their platforms. These reports are essential reading for government analysts and university researchers. Our AI companies should adopt this practice. If Chinese companies that specialize in influence campaigns are feeding information about their tools and strategies into American owned large language models, we should know that. Second, we need a public diplomacy strategy that acknowledges the existence of this new trolling threat, systematically tracks these campaigns in real time, and responds with public messaging that is also clever, shareable, and fluent in the cultural idiom of its audience. In March, Secretary of State Marco Rubio directed embassies to push back uh, on coordinated propaganda efforts abroad. That instinct is right, but it requires reckoning with this latest form of propaganda. Iran is exploiting a gap that our current defenses weren't built to close. We need to address it before a more capable adversary decides to do the same. There's a lot about AI in the paper today. Here's an article, another essay. Doctors, this is why our patients are using ChatGPT by Helen Ouyang. Several months ago, I got the results back. Oh, by the way, you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Several months ago, I got the results back from some routine blood tests, and let's just say several numbers were a tad too high. My doctor advised continued diet and exercise and signed off on the results. For the past couple of years, though, my numbers had been inching up, and I was frustrated that I couldn't seem to do much about them. I requested a phone call from my doctor. Surely she had better advice than what she wrote. But she messaged back that if I wanted to discuss my results, I had to set up another appointment. So I did what everyone does in this day and age. I turned to artificial intelligence. With low expectations, I typed my lab results into ChatGPT. As both a physician and a patient, I found the experience startling, not because ChatGPT dazzled me with its scientific knowledge, but because it behaved the way I wish modern medicine and its practitioners still would. I had always assumed the human side of medicine was the part AI couldn't touch. Sure, I knew doctors are turning to AI to help them break bad news, since patients seem to find messages crafted by bots more empathetic than those written by doctors. Wow. But in practice, what I thought really mattered was that a person was delivering that care. The chat box didn't just spit back generic advice. It asked questions about my daily life and figured out what I could realistically change. It suggested a short walk immediately after eating, something I'd never taken seriously. When I inquired about doing a longer activity, it told me that it would likely only offer marginal benefits. Its recommendations were manageable and easy to follow. When I sheepishly asked a silly question, If eating my vitamin gummies after my post-meal walks would raise my blood sugar, it asked me to upload the link to the specific product, and it did a close analysis of its ingredients. The answer was no. I felt comfortable telling that there was no way I was taking some of its suggestions, consuming Metamucil drinks or another psyllium husk powder concoction. No, thank you. And it responded with understanding and offered me alternatives. No offense taken. Of course, as a doctor, I know when to question the chatbot and when to ignore it. Many other patients don't. But I could also ask the same question over and over, and the chat box never seemed annoyed or judgmental. Most important, it kept cheering me on. Precisely the kind of steady relational care we keep insisting only humans can provide. Recently, I met a patient living with a highly curable form of cancer. Every week, he would ask a chatbot if his cancer could be cured. He already knew the answer, he just longed for regular reassurance. As a doctor, I was a little embarrassed to be using ChatGPT, but every interaction with, say, Open Evidence, a professional medical AI tool, felt cold and sterile. It referred to me as if I were a case report, not a person with preferences and habits. I realized what was winning me over about ChatGPT wasn't its ability to sift through the latest studies or diagnose my ailments, but its unwavering messages of empathy and encouragement and its endless willingness to listen and its patience. It's not human, but it can model some traits we value most in human interaction. I followed ChatGPT's advice, and when my blood work improved, ChatGPT affirmed my progress and urged me to keep going. I doubt I would have made those changes, much less stuck with them, without that sustained back and forth. I certainly hadn't before. It's a grim fact of American medicine today that doctors can't come close to a chatbot's availability. And when the healthcare system can't reliably offer time, attentiveness, and compassion, patients will go searching for them somewhere else, even from a machine we assumed could never feel human. AI may not replace doctors, but it will change what patients expect from us. Doctors need to adapt. Before I used a chatbot for my own health concerns, the thought of telling a patient to ask ChatGPT was inconceivable, or at least something I considered terrible care. Now I'm not so sure. In certain situations, AI offers something patients clearly need, and medicine has trouble fulfilling. The reality is many patients are already consulting AI. Doctors can keep fearing or condemning those interactions, or they can figure out how to support people using AI tools for their health care, cautiously, with clear guardrails. I would never tell patients to ask ChatGPT or Claude for a diagnosis, but perhaps I would suggest that they use it to make sense of a new condition or keep up with routine screenings or translate diet and exercise into steps that actually fit into their lives, as I did. At the same time, we need safeguards built into these systems to protect people from real harm from dangerous advice. My experience with the chatbot has already shifted how I interact with patients in the ER, with only minutes to piece together fragments of their circumstances. When a patient asks the same question repeatedly, I try to listen for what's behind it. Maybe she's not after more medical facts. And we'll conclude with some letters to the editor. These are on an article that was titled, "We Arrived on Campus at the Dawn of ChatGPT. What Was College For?" And here's a letter from Warren, Rhode Island. What Mr. Baker reported about widespread cheating at Stanford absolutely floored me. In one survey, 49% of 849 computer science majors who responded said they would rather cheat on an exam than fail, meaning that only 51% passed the honor code test. I have honor engraved into my United States Naval Academy class ring from 1965. We lived by the honor code because our lives depended upon it. Imagine if a young ensign did not laboriously check all the sea valves in the engine room before a submarine dived, but said he did and the sub went down. Yes, honor was beaten into our brains, and we live by it to this day. I fault the leaders at Stanford for not improving or enforcing their honor code. Either a school believes in the unequivocal value of ethical behavior in its educational program, or it doesn't. I sure am glad I chose the Naval Academy over Stanford in 1961. Who would want to be an alumnus of a school full of cheats? And we'll conclude with this. Colbert's sudden return to late night, it happened on public access by Derek Bryson Taylor. When the comedian Stephen Colbert hosted the final episode of The Late Show on CBS on Thursday, he told his viewers that the next place they would most likely see him was on public access television in Michigan. Turns out that was no joke. On Friday night, Colbert hosted an episode of Only in Monroe, which covers the happenings of Monroe, Michigan, a town of about 20,000 people roughly 40 miles southwest of Detroit. It's been an excruciating 23 hours without being on TV, Colbert said near the beginning of the hour-long program. So I'm grateful to be able to be here on Monroe Community Media before they also get acquired by Paramount. Friday's episode of Only in Monroe, which aired at the same time that The Late Show did, shared a similar structure. Colbert opened with a monologue full of jokes about the show's small-scale operation and the town's experience with a Bigfoot sighting. At one point, Colbert asked if the beer Milwaukee's Best was a sponsor. They're not, Colbert said to someone off camera, and we don't have any sponsors, and we actually lost a lot of money making the show tonight? Now I know how CBS felt. The show's regular hosts, Michelle Bauman and Kay Lanny Ray Rafko Wilson, also known as Miss America 1988, were his first guests. Jack White, who grew up in Detroit, served as the musical director playing songs on a boombox and a reel-to-reel player. Byron Allen, the comedian turned entrepreneur whose show Comics Unleashed took over the Late Show time slot, made an appearance, as did the rapper Eminem. Both are from Michigan. The actor Steve Buscemi made a cameo in what he called a public service announcement for a local restaurant, Buscemi's Pizza and Subs, no relation. Colbert dished with guests throughout the show, took shots of an alcohol distilled nearby, taste tested Monroe-style chili dogs, though the show appeared to forget which hot dog came from which restaurant, and made peanut butter, potato chip, and barbecue sauce sandwiches with the actor Jeff Daniels, who lives in Michigan. Colbert, for his part, was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in South Carolina. But his appearance on Only in Monroe was actually a homecoming. He first hosted an episode of the show in 2015, a couple of months before taking the reins of The Late Show from David Letterman. That time, he also interviewed the regular hosts of Only in Monroe and also welcomed Eminem, whom he introduced as a local Michigander who was making a name for himself in the competitive world of music. Colbert had not forgotten about that experience more than a decade later. During his final Late Show episode on Thursday, he reminded his viewers of that appearance, telling them that the show had attracted an audience of 12 people. Show business being what it is these days, he said, that's probably where you'll see me next. Friday's version of Only in Monroe ended with Colbert and his guests taking hammers to the show's set and then lighting it on fire in a dumpster outside. And that's it. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This is Ted. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a little unusual because of the kinds of articles that get published on a holiday, but I really enjoyed reading them, and I hope you did. And I will talk to you next week. Bye.